I'm so good. Hi, welcome back. I'm Jodie Maddox, a parent coach and education consultant.
And I'm Tish Taylor, a child psychologist and, well, actually a licensed school psychologist. I think I've said that before.
Yeah. And my background is in special education and school administration. And we've been having these great 20-minute conversations about every other week on topics that tend to come up on a typical basis within our own practices. And tonight we're talking about dyslexia. And from a background of special education, I can tell you I'm excited to talk about this because for many years in the state of Missouri, Kansas, wherever you might be, we didn't really talk about dyslexia the way that we talk about it now. So I'm really excited to maybe bring a little bit more light to the subject. And a lot of hope when it comes to dyslexia, I feel. Back in the day...
Well, I think we didn't talk about the word.
Oh,
right, in schools.
Let's talk about the... Oh, no, not at all.
Right, in schools it wasn't really... dyslexia, we didn't really say that word.
No, you weren't allowed to bring it up. And
not that it was a bad word.
What? And we just didn't have the information. So I started in the 90s, and you could write an IEP for a child that had a learning disability, but you didn't say they are dyslexic on there at all. And if they were dyslexic, as we know, that came from a clinical diagnosis, which we wouldn't have screened for even. We wouldn't have even screened for it at the grade school level. Things are different now. Yay, we're winning. In 2004, I think it was, I went to Wichita and went through the alphabetic phonics program. Are you familiar with that?
So not a whole bunch.
Yeah, it's okay. It's an Orton Gillingham program, and it's specifically to help teach children with dyslexia. And we learned so many different things. It was fantastic. My point in this story is, it is now 2023, and we are finally doing some of the things in our daily classroom, in our lesson plans, in our preparation, in our approach to reading that I learned back in 2004 that I wasn't really allowed to talk about in the education process. So things are getting better.
The whole language era.
Yeah.
Anyway, well, that's another topic.
Oh, yeah. Shall we dive into that? Yeah, it might have been the whole language era. I think it was a whole bunch of other things, too. So, to me, there's so much hope around the topic of dyslexia, more so now than ever. And at least in the state of Kansas, it's mandated that we are screening for dyslexia kindergarten through 5th grade. There are also other benchmarks, standards put in place that catch kids in middle school, catch kids in 9th grade. If kids are coming from homeschooling environments into systematic school settings like high school, there's a screening mandated there. And so there's just so many things put in place. And from an education point of view, I feel like we're trying to catch things as early as possible because we know there is a systematic way to help these children read, write, comprehend, and there's hope. And so why aren't we catching them as soon as we can to provide those opportunities? So
but I think we should also talk about is there a difference in clinical evaluations versus school evaluations?
Yes.
And what should you do?
Yes.
If you have that question about your child, what should you do?
So on the school end, we don't evaluate in any way for dyslexia. We can screen and we can see red flags and we can put interventions in place to see if possible growth is found through the interventions, but the actual diagnosis and the testing and all of those things are on the outside basis.
Mm-hmm. Well, but I also will say schools will evaluate via the special education process.
Correct.
You can get to that step.
Yes.
If it is deemed that, the student or your child is not progressing with the interventions in place.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there can be that evaluation to the special education process, but schools don't typically make a clinical Schools do not make a clinical diagnosis of dyslexia. They'll just decide, does the student qualify for services, more intensive services through the school district? And they typically call that a learning disability.
Correct. And so, in my world of education, because I was in private education, we would always say you can go through your school district and they can help you with that process, and they can do the evaluation, and they will be able to put services in place if your child qualifies. But for a full specific diagnosis, that would be an outside resource that you sometimes insurance will pay for it, sometimes it's costly. Those are decisions that parents have to decide. So it's nice to have that free intervention or help through the school district, but you don't get that specific diagnosis. Which knowledge is power. I think if you can name the specific learning disability, then you kind of know where to start and where to go from there.
Well, and the other thing that I've come across over the years is, there's a range of the severity of dyslexia, right? So some students or children might have like a milder form, some a more moderate or severe form. And, the more severe it is, the more intervention or specialized intervention that's needed. And, then you're trying to answer those questions. Once you decide here's what's going on, here's what is, then the next question is what is needed, and am I getting enough specialized instruction, and am I getting enough of it? And one of the things I think that comes into play too is how much is it interfering. So again, it might come back to how severe the disability is, and maybe how much time has gone by, right? How much of a gap there is between the student's skills and reading level compared to their same grade peers.
Right. Do we want to maybe talk about some of the signs or symptoms or red flags?
Sure.
Yeah. So if we start out with just the basics, I'd say language. Sometimes there's a delay in language.
Sometimes yes, no, yes or no.
Yes, correct. And that's why a lot of times it's not caught till later on, because there isn't a delay in language. But sometimes a delay in language. A lot of the phonological or phonemic awareness pieces, like the rhyming, is difficult. Recalling basic words for simple things. Not able to segment sounds. Memory issues are typical as well. Off the top of your head.
Well, so sometimes it's subtle. Sometimes students have, or students or kids, I'll kind of intertwine those terms, but sometimes there's, a language disorder, a language delay, and that's a little easier to spot. But sometimes there are splintered skills or more subtle difficulties. Like, so Jodie was talking about phonological awareness. You do see that a lot with dyslexia, right? Because it's those phonetic structures that you hear and process in terms of hearing. Or there can be things like, somewhat of weaker vocabulary, expressive or receptive vocabulary. There can be some weaknesses with grammatical structures, just semantic knowledge. So comprehension, aspects of comprehension. So sometimes you see some of those splintered language skills with dyslexia. Sometimes you don't.
Honestly, in the classroom, I think it presents itself really, really simply with the younger kids. That it looks a lot like they have a hard time recalling information at the same pace as their peers. So there's like a memory situation, or it's hard to recall how to write something. It's hard to recall how to decode something. It's hard to recall using the right words. I can remember having conversations with little kids about what did they have for breakfast. And the answer that they eventually come up with is toast. But it's hard for them to say the word toast. So they would say something like, it was hot, it was crunchy, I put butter on it. And when they finally talk through what it is, it's toast. Does that make sense? And
right,
so
semantic accuracy.
Yes, and it presents itself in simple terms as something like there's just a little bit of a delay. Like the information is there, cognitively they are extremely smart, and you see that in other ways, the ways they problem solve things, or the way they can remember really detailed information, like really specific information. You're like, wow, okay, you're right, all those things did happen. But then again, they have a simple answer that they're trying to recall, and it just isn't coming. So sometimes it presents itself in a way that it looks like there's a little bit of a memory situation or a retrieval. We would call it rapid recall, like the rapid recall isn't really on pace with their peers.
The other thing I still hear a lot, so that, there's traditionally been this idea that, you read things backwards, and that's what dyslexia is. Not really. That's not really the definition of dyslexia. It's really mastery of that phonetic structure of decoding and reading. And so certainly a lot of children with dyslexia have difficulty with decoding, but they can also have difficulty just with word recognition, that automatic word recognition, because the more we read, the more automatic it becomes, and we don't even have to think about it, and we're automatically recalling words as we're going across the page. But that's difficult with most individuals with dyslexia, and it translates to spelling.
Yep. And so that's where the systematic approach, so those are some of the signs that dyslexia might be a part of the conversation. But some of the approaches when it comes to like getting the support, getting the help, it has to be a systematic, scientifically proven approach.
That would be the best approach.
Yes. And those approaches are typically Orton-Gillingham based, and there are lots of different programs out there. Yeah. But most all schools, especially in Kansas and Missouri these days, are investing in reading programs that are aligned with the science of reading, which is another whole podcast that we won't really get into right now. Yeah. But that is, again, laced with hope for me. Mm-hmm. These are big conversations that have been swirling around for days and years, but they're finally coming to the top of the priority list, because we know when kids are able to read and write fluently and comprehend information, math comes a little bit easier, music, everything. It's just all there. Easier. Yeah. Everything's a little bit easier. So also, you can do that in a private setting. It doesn't have to be through your school. You can find private practitioners that can attack it just a little bit faster, maybe on a one-on-one basis. So that is also another means. But what we would see is that there's a certain structure that has to come first. So there's the sound comes before the script of actually writing the letter that matches the sound. And once you nail that, then you can do some decoding. Then you can do some spelling. Then there's some fluency. Then there's some comprehension. Then there's actually writing of sentences. That's a really fast timeline. It's a really fast timeline. But what we're seeing is that once those things are mastered in those very concrete steps, then they're actually retained and achievable and retrievable for the kids. Mm-hmm.
If I can go just to take a little offshoot,
sure,
if that's okay. But there also and you may be aware, you may not be aware, but there's also a disability dysgraphia. We call that a disorder of written expression. It's a little bit synonymous, although there's some varied skills that can go into that, or lack of skill. So dysgraphia is just getting information on paper. Although some children really have that, the fine motor aspect of getting words and writing and handwriting on paper, and it's not very organized, or just the handwriting itself is difficult to read or not spaced well, and there's some delay there. And then some children really have difficulty getting their thoughts organized on paper, the spelling aspect of it, the writing mechanics aspect of it, or there's a deficit between what they're able to speak and a real deficit with what they're able to write.
Yeah.
There's also the math piece, which there's not nearly as much information out there about a math disorder like dyscalculia, but some children do have that, and some children with dyslexia have one or both of these other learning disabilities as well.
And would you say that sometimes dyslexia presents itself as ADHD? Like you're seeing...
Say a little bit more about that.
Well, sometimes you're seeing behaviors that could be interpreted by an untrained professional, like, they seem a little inattentive, like they don't seem to be able to concentrate, or they don't seem to be able to focus on their work. And so you're thinking maybe it's an attention issue, but then when you dive a little deeper, you go through the testing, it's actually dyslexia. We would see that because it looks like they're inattentive, but in fact, they don't have the skills to decode, or they don't have the ability to read fluently. So there's maybe a little bit of avoidance going on, or there's maybe some apprehension to work. And so sometimes what looks like an attention issue is actually dyslexia because of the way it's presenting itself.
Yeah. So a lot of times the clinical evaluation can tease that out.
Yes, for sure.
It's not uncommon to have, there's all kinds of statistics out there. And so which one is it? I don't know. But roughly speaking, maybe a third of individuals with a learning disorder also have ADHD. So at times both things are at play.
Yeah. A lot of times in the classroom, we as teachers, we as administrators, we as whatever in the education world, we're like, oh, I think this child might or I think this child, and it's because we're seeing similar things that we've seen in other students we've taught or whatever. But as an administrator, I would always try and remind us in the education world, like, we don't diagnose, we don't know. We definitely work with hundreds of children, and we definitely see similar patterns in everything. But I can't tell you how many times a child has gone for testing and come back, and it's like, oh, okay, that's not what I would have. Yes. And so we definitely want to remember as parents and as educators that we leave those types of things to clinical professionals who can diagnose and really dive deep into something that you might think is an attention issue, comes back as dyslexia, or something you might think, I think this child is having trouble reading, I think this child might be screened for dyslexia, and then comes back as an attention issue. I mean, there's many surprises. many surprises.
That's the fun. But I have to tell you, that is the fun part about evaluations.
Probably.
It's like the sleuthing it out. I still love that part.
I bet. It was always fun at the high school level when a child who was receiving accommodations for maybe attention, maybe dyslexia, whatever, they would go to take the ACT. And the ACT really washed everything out because they would give you all the extended time. Sometimes you could take it over a couple of days, and that score would come back, and you would be like, this is awesome. This is awesome, because the typical classroom wasn't supporting this type of grade or this whatever. But that ACT sometimes would really flesh it out, and you're like, look at that. So yeah, that's the sleuth part of it too, right? Yeah. Okay, well, great conversation about dyslexia. Anything else?
No, I just say, if folks have questions, just email us.
Yeah, email us. And if you have any concerns or thoughts about maybe your child presenting some symptoms in this world, you can always reach out to one of us. Their teachers are really a great resource. All teachers have gone through some type of training for the screening piece of this anymore. Lots of information.
You mean the reading teachers or all the general ed teachers?
All the general ed teachers in the state of Kansas have had some kind of professional development. It might have only been a couple of hours, but it's so great. They have a little bit of background on how to proceed, who to contact in their school, how to help you go to the next step. So that's good help. That's good help. But anyway, I didn't ask you, did you have a good Thanksgiving?
Yes.
We did too. On to Christmas, right?
On to Christmas, yeah.
All right.
We're not waiting around, are we?
We're not waiting around. No. My house is ready. Is your house ready?
Yep, ready.
Awesome. All right. Well, have a great couple of weeks, and we'll see you next time.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.